33-year-old male found dead a few days ago. Someone amongst them is our killer.
A hostile country is trying to build a nuclear bomb. Behind the plot is a mastermind focused on the destruction of Israel.
General Mohammed Suleiman hated Israelis, hated the state of Israel.
It will take 3 elite Black Ops units to deal with this menace. Special forces operating deep within enemy territory to confirm the threat.
That was an extremely risky intel gathering mission. If there was a mistake made, that could have been war.
An elite flying unit to take it out.
They destroyed their target, they exited, they lost nothing.
And finally, an assassination unit to deal with the man behind the threat.
3 of them came as scuba divers to his beach house, shot him, and then disappeared.
This is the top secret story of the Israeli strike against Syria. North Korea, 2004. Deep inside this secretive communist state, a train travels through a remote northern town. Then suddenly,
In April of 2004, there was a massive train explosion in northern North Korea.
the explosion is so enormous, it registers magnitude 3.6, equivalent to a small earthquake.
It killed several hundred people, destroyed a town of 10,000 people, left 2,000 people wounded.
According to the North Korean government, the train was carrying liquefied petroleum. But before anyone can discover anything more, the regime forbids further reporting on the incident.
A week later, they banned all use of cell phones in North Korea for 5 years.
Just what is going on in the rogue nuclear state? 5,000 miles away, one nation is following the incident with great interest. Meir Dagan is Israel's top spy, the chief of the Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad.
Meir Dagan was a legendary figure in the Israeli security establishment. He had a reputation for being very brutal in what he was prepared to do in pursuit of Israel's national security interest.
North Korea behaving secretly is nothing new. But what intrigues Dagan are intelligence reports that a Syrian aircraft has now landed in North Korea. Contact between North Korea and the Arab world is unusual and highly concerning to Israel.
And that was when the Israelis started to take a closer interest in what was going on.
The plane is supposed to be delivering aid, but instead it seems it is being loaded with the bodies of victims of the crash. More than that, the bodies are being transported in lead-lined coffins and are carried by men wearing chemical weapons suits. This is extremely strange. Then Dagan is informed that the bodies in the lead coffins are not North Koreans, but Syrian scientists.
There were 12 Syrian scientists from something called the Syrian Scientific Research Center, their covert military research and acquisition center.
It raises a terrifying possibility for Dagan. Could North Korea be helping Syria to build a nuclear weapon? Dagan has to find out more. It becomes a top priority for Mossad and will eventually lead to one of the most extraordinary black ops of all time. Two years later, a woman walks into a London hotel bar. Her arrival is noticed by a man who has been drinking alone. But this is no innocent meeting. The man is a high-ranking Syrian nuclear official traveling to London alone.
He comes to London, residing in a posh hotel. He has a meeting tomorrow morning in London, but he has the night or the evening to spend. He goes to the bar of the hotel and extremely happy that in the bar he meets a woman with a wonderful character.
But what the Syrian doesn't know is that he is under surveillance. Mossad had been alerted to the Syrian's visit when he checked into a hotel under a false name.
The Israelis dispatched teams of people to monitor him.
Unaware he is being watched, the Syrian continues to flirt with the woman.
And she's also impressed by him. He orders another drink and another drink, and he's confident that he has a wonderful way of spending the night.
But he is also unaware that the woman is not as she seems.
He doesn't know that this woman is a part of the Mossad crew, and she was there to keep him busy while her team is breaking into his hotel room.
The Mossad agents are members of the Neviat unit, experts in covert bugging.
The team specialized in breaking into hotel rooms.
It takes barely seconds for the Neviat team to override the hotel room security. Once inside, they realize they have hit the jackpot. The Syrian official has left his laptop completely unguarded. Immediately, they go to work.
The Mossad was able to break in, get its hands on the laptop computer, and copy its contents off the hard drive.
The agents transfer the entire contents of the computer hard drive to Mossad HQ in Tel Aviv instantaneously.
They took all the information from the computer, and then they put devices on the computer to monitor any future activity from that computer.
As they leave the room, the female Mossad agent abandons the hapless Syrian. Within 15 minutes, Dagan and his analysts are looking at the files in Tel Aviv.
They open it. They find a lot of different details and documents.
What they found on his computer was really rather extraordinary.
On one folder, they found JPEGs that looked very odd.
Appearing on the screens in front of Dagan are hundreds of photos documenting the construction of a large industrial facility.
It was clear that this is an unknown facility, a huge one.
The building they saw was quite large, 130 feet by 130 feet by 70 feet tall.
Initially, the building resembles a treehouse on stilts, with pipes leading to a pumping station. Later photos show modifications, and eventually the entire complex is hidden beneath a huge roof. Initially, Dagan is unsure of what the facility might be. But then it begins to dawn on him what the images are showing. He sees large industrial equipment inside the facility. It is an exact replica of something Dagan has seen before in intelligence images from North Korea.
They showed that it was almost an exact replica of the Yongbyon nuclear weapons facility in North Korea.
It was exactly the same reactor. The two were perfectly matched.
Dagan is in no doubt as to what they have uncovered.
The evidence was overwhelming.
North Korea was building a nuclear reactor in Syria.
Further evidence from the laptop confirms it.
There were blueprints of the nuclear power plant. There were pictures of the nuclear power plant.
The Israelis even had photographs of Syrians and North Korean nuclear experts together.
It is Israel's nightmare scenario, a hostile nuclear power on its own doorstep.
It was a nuclear reactor that can be used only for military purpose.
Whoever is building this has only one purpose: to assemble a nuclear bomb.
Dagan is now certain there is a nuclear weapons program in Syria, but he has no idea where it is. Intent on finding out, he orders Israeli satellites to monitor potential sites. Eventually, they close in on a remote area of Syria called Al-Kabar, where some highly unusual communications have been monitored.
They intercepted a very unusual spike of telephone communications from this location at Al-Kabar, which is in the middle of nowhere in the desert, to Pyongyang, North Korea.
It was very far from the capital, Damascus. It was in a remote part of northeastern Syria, but not far from the Euphrates River and the border with Iraq.
Israeli satellites now pinpoint a large building at Al-Kabar. When they compare them with the stolen images from the Syrian laptop, it is a perfect match. Al-Kabar has to be the site of Syria's nuclear weapons program. Armed with the intel on the Syrian facility, Dagan goes to see the Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert.
Mayor Dagan came to see Prime Minister Olmert and told him this dramatic news that Syria is in an advanced stage of developing nuclear weapons.
The Israeli Prime Minister immediately recognizes the seriousness of the threat.
Olmert said one thing right at the start, and that was the Syrian nuclear weapons program is simply intolerable for Israel. It cannot be permitted. This is an existential threat to Israel. This reactor has to go away.
The only way to be rid of the nuclear weapons program is to blow up the reactor. But first, he has a series of questions for Dagan. Most importantly, how far advanced is the reactor? If it is already operational, then a bombing could cause a catastrophe.
If the reactor is already active, then full destruction of the reactor might cause an enormous environmental pollution and poisoning.
But Dagan does not yet know if the reactor is fully operational.
The JPEGs were 15 months old, so this facility must be more advanced.
They desperately need to find out how advanced the construction is. That means doing something extremely risky. Sending someone in to take a look.
The next step would have to be risking the lives of operatives.
Olmert has only one group of men capable of operating undetected hundreds of miles within enemy territory. So he calls upon Israel's elite Black Ops unit. In English, they are known as the unit. In Hebrew, they are the Sayeret Matkal.
Sayeret Matkal is the highest elite commando unit of the Israeli army.
Sayeret Matkal in Israel is nothing short of legendary or mythical. It's essentially the top unit in the army. Their job is to go on special operations that are considered beyond the scope of your regular troops.
It's a unit modeled after the British SAS. SEAL teams are similar to it, Delta Force is similar to it. They're some of the most highly trained units in the world.
The Sayeret Matkal has one particular specialism: operating covertly behind enemy lines.
The expertise of Sayeret Matkal is to infiltrate enemy countries in silent intelligence gathering operations.
They've gone into Jordan, they've gone into Lebanon, they've done missions in and out of these countries undetected.
Whilst never officially admitted, it seems that on an overcast night in midsummer, the selected commandos prepare to set out on their mission. They head deep behind enemy lines to confirm the existence of the Syrian nuclear weapons program.
The Israelis have been very secretive about how they got there, but certainly they are very adept at using low-flying, almost silent helicopters.
It is understood they boarded two Sikorsky CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopters to travel at low altitude and cross the border into Syria. On such missions, the pilots have to negotiate the terrain using night vision goggles. As an extra precaution, some of the commandos are disguised as Syrian soldiers. The commandos are dropped a safe distance from the facility.
Israelis were able to get on the ground within about a mile of this mystery building in northeastern Syria.
As the commandos set off, they know that no matter what, the Syrians must not be alerted to their presence. Once the helicopters are gone, if the Syrians discover them, there is no chance of being rescued.
But that was an extremely risky intel gathering mission. If there was a mistake made and they were compromised, that could have been war.
The Sayeret Matkal commandos come within meters of the Al-Kabar facility and immediately start intelligence gathering.
The unit did their intel collection on the ground, right at the site. That was extremely dangerous.
Israeli commandos dressed as Syrian soldiers went and took pictures of the facility.
Of course, they took photographs, but also took soil samples.
Collecting soil and water samples from around the facility is the most important element of the mission. It is the only way Israel can find out for sure if the reactor is operational.
If the reactor is active, then a very small portion, not lethal, but very, very small portion of radioactive substance would be found in the water.
Once the intel collection is complete, the commandos hide their tracks and prepare to depart. But then,
they were almost caught. They left the scene in the very last minute.
the commandos remain undetected, and the mission complete, they return to Israel with the soil and water samples. In a government laboratory in Tel Aviv, the samples are tested for nuclear contamination. The results of the exhaustive tests are delivered to Olmert and Dagan. The soil and water samples collected by the Sayeret Matkal commandos do contain traces of nuclear contamination, but crucially, not at levels that indicate the reactor is fully operational.
The samples prove that the reactor is still inactive.
This is critical news. It means Olmert can now give the order to take it out. Olmert calls a meeting of Israel's top military and intelligence chiefs. They are all agreed on one thing.
However this reactor got started and whenever it got started, the end is clear. The reactor is intolerable. We're not going to allow it, and it's going to go away.
The only question is how to destroy it. The first option is to send the Sayeret Matkal back in.
Perhaps sending in soldiers, again a Sayeret Matkal commando team, to attack on the ground, hoping that in secret you could get enough Israeli commandos and explosives to the scene to blow up the building.
They know that they can get people to the site, but there are problems with this tactic.
If you have to deploy special forces, it's a huge operation, very dangerous operation. They have to penetrate the site. They have to bring a lot of explosive.
Above all, they can't be sure that a commando operation will pack enough firepower.
Frankly, the Israeli military had doubts about that.
You have a very large reactor built of reinforced concrete and steel. You can't send 5 guys in there, with backpacks full of explosives. There's not enough explosives.
Olmert's only option is to strike from the air.
It looked like using the Israeli Air Force would be smarter.
Air power has an advantage. It can come like a light, very speedy. It can do the job with a lot of ordnance and disengage before the enemy understands what happened. So if you have to choose between the two alternatives, usually the airstrike is much more efficient and less risky.
The Prime Minister gives the order to prepare for an aerial assault on the Syrian reactor. It will be known as Operation Orchard. And for it to succeed, Olmert alerts another of Israel's Special Forces units. Squadron 69, known as the Hapatashim, the Hamas Squadron. There is no squadron better suited for a mission to destroy an enemy nuclear program. That's because they've done it before. "25 years earlier, 8 Hapatashim pilots flew into Iraq to bomb a nuclear facility being built by Saddam Hussein.
I was a fighter pilot, a major, a deputy squadron commander, who prepared himself to destroy the nuclear reactor.
Evading Iraqi air defenses, they take out the facility in a clinical strike.
The whole operation from takeoff to the attack was 1 hour, 43 minutes and 30 seconds.
But a quarter century later, an attack on Syria is a much harder prospect.
The Israeli Air Force says they can make something look easy, but it's never easy. Even to fly to a target in Syria, you don't just fly right across the border.
For decades, Syria has been developing one of the most formidable anti-aircraft defense systems in the world. They have installed the Russian-built Tor M1 air defense system. and have multiple surface-to-air missile batteries ready to repel any air attack.
Nothing is easy when it comes to attacking a country that has anti-aircraft systems, and so the Israelis worked hard on their countermeasures.
The Hapatashim has aircraft specifically designed to evade such air defenses. The US-made F-15 and F-16 fighter bombers.
The F-16 is well equipped to cope with a lock-on of a missile battery. We can break the lock. We can use some ECM, flares against guided missiles, and some electronic warfare against the same batteries.
They also carry electronic countermeasures that can fool the Syrian air defense system and allow the attacking craft to enter Syrian airspace undetected. In the meantime, the Hapatashim pilots begin flying practice missions. To be successful, their bombs must hit a precise target point so that they will penetrate the building and explode from within. They practice steep-angle dive bombing runs on a tiny target. It is more than just practice. Watching them is General Eliezer Shkedi, head of the Israeli Air Force. He is looking to identify the very best pilots in the squadron, as Israel will only be able to send a limited number of aircraft into Syria.
If you bring too many airplanes, the chances that you will be discovered is bigger. We've done a lot of simulations and calculation. What is the optimum number that is making sure that the reactor will be destroyed?
A date has yet to be decided for Operation Orchard. But then Prime Minister Olmert receives intelligence that forces his hand. Mossad has detected activity on the Syrian coast.
North Korean ships were arriving at the port of Tartus in Syria.
These ships are carrying the final materials the Syrians need for the Al-Kabar reactor to become fully operational. Olmert has to act now. At exactly 23:59, 10 Hapatashim pilots are ordered to take off. Even now, they have no idea what their target is.
There were two sets of planes that took off around midnight in early September.
The F-16s and F-15s take off 20 seconds apart, armed with 500-pound AGM-65 bombs. They head out to sea at nearly 600 miles an hour and follow a route designed to avoid detection by Syrian air defenses.
What the Israeli Air Force did was map a route that would take planes to the west over the Mediterranean, then north, then east over Turkish airspace.
Israel's Prime Minister and senior military commanders gather in the Israeli Air Force's underground command center, known as the Pit. Here they monitor the route of the fighter bombers. Once it is established that there are no technical faults with any of the planes, 3 of the F-15s are ordered to return home. The remaining 7 continue on the planned route at low altitude.
They flew up the Mediterranean and then on the east, on the Syrian-Turkish border.
It is only now that the pilots are told that this is a live mission, and they are flying into heavily defended Syrian airspace. These elite pilots are trained to suppress nerves.
As a fighter pilot, develop some mechanism and techniques how to depress the fear. I'm not telling you that there is no fear. If somebody will tell you he is not afraid, he is lying to you. It is always there. It is always with you. The fact that you can be killed.
The planes approach Syrian airspace. It is now that they will encounter the Syrian air defense systems.
The military side of the operation involved somehow evading the Syrian radar so as not to alert the Syrians to their presence.
Using codes allegedly sold to them by Russia, the Israelis are able to make the Syrian air defenses suddenly display hundreds of enemy planes. Then just as suddenly, the Syrian system detects no enemy planes at all. To the Syrians, it appears like a brief technical glitch.
So the Israelis actually made the Syrian system think that everything was normal, as though the radar screens were absolutely fine, but the Israeli planes were invisible. The Syrians didn't even know they were under attack.
Now in enemy airspace, they move on to the next stage. Precise coordinates of the Al-Kabar complex are sent to the Israeli pilots' onboard computers, and the planes swing south to begin their bombing run.
This is the risky time. This is where your breathing become much more in a high pulse.
It is no longer about technology. Now the human element takes over.
At the end of the day, as a pilot, you have to find the target yourself, and the aiming, nobody can help you in aiming and finding the target.
But as the pilots focus on the target, they are at their most vulnerable.
You have 1 minute that you are exposed to everybody, and you are not defending yourself because you are concentrating on aiming on the target. This is the 1 minute that the most difficult of the flight.
As they begin their bombing run, the pilots suddenly detect anti-aircraft rockets. Back in the pit in Tel Aviv, they have no idea what is going on. Has the target been hit? Have the pilots been shot down? Then comes a radio transmission. It is the single word, Arizona. Arizona. The code word that confirms the bombs have found their target. Not a single Israeli plane has been lost, and the reactor has been totally destroyed.
There was nothing left, really, but a smoking ruin at the reactor.
The most dangerous part of the mission is over.
When you release the bombs, you are much lighter now, you can maneuver much stronger, and you go back to a low level, and then you start to relax.
The pilots exit Syrian airspace at high speed. The mission is a complete success.
They destroyed their target, they exited, they lost nothing.
Olmert immediately telephones the White House to tell President Bush that something that never existed doesn't exist anymore. Now there is a tense wait for the Syrian response. Olmert is confident that the Syrians dare not react, but he cannot be certain. Immediately after the raid, he had sent a message to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. saying that Israel would not publicly take credit for the raid.
They calculated that if they didn't make too much noise about it, didn't claim responsibility for it, didn't boast about it, then it might be in Assad's best interest simply to ignore it.
Olmert's gamble is that Assad has no desire to draw attention to Syria's illegal nuclear weapons program, or to be publicly humiliated.
The purpose was not to push President Assad of Syria with his back to the wall in this ego-derived scene of the Middle East.
Sure enough, the gamble pays off. Syrian state news announces that Israeli planes had been repelled from Syrian airspace. It is a lie, but both countries are content to pretend that the bombing never happened. It seems Olmert has successfully safeguarded Israel's future. But one thing still bothers Olmert and Dagan. How had Syria managed to develop a nuclear weapons program in complete secrecy?
For 7 years, Israel didn't know about the #1 project that the Syrians were engaged with. Now, a nuclear reactor is not something that it's easy to hide. It's a huge facility.
So Mossad begins investigating how Syria has managed to keep the Al-Kabar facility a secret. What they uncover is that Syrians had developed a networking system that avoided all electronic communications.
They took a flight back in time. They said, let's, in the most sensitive issues, let's not use any sort of electronic transmission. Every time we want to send a message, we will print a hard copy, put it in an envelope, seal it with wax, write top secret, and build a network of couriers that would take these envelopes from place to place.
And at the heart of this communication system is a man renowned for his hatred of Israel and one of the most powerful men in Syria, General Mohammed Suleiman.
Mohammed Suleiman was the most powerful, closest advisor to the current leader of Syria, Assad.
His office was just across the hall from the office of the president in the presidential palace in Damascus.
Because of his closeness to the president, Suleiman is known as Assad's shadow. This is the mastermind behind Syria's top-secret nuclear program.
Suleiman, he had credit for the compartmentalization within the Syrian government that allowed him to undertake this project for years. And no one knows about it.
But Mossad have uncovered some even more worrying intelligence.
The intelligence was that Suleiman had not gotten the message. After the destruction of the nuclear power plant, the Israelis received intelligence that the Syrians were resuming their efforts to build another nuclear power plant.
The Syrians may have to start from scratch, but with Suleiman in charge, it seems that the Syrian nuclear weapons program could soon be up and running again.
You know, technically, when you destroy a nuclear program, within 5 years, the countries that have done it can do it again. If you have enough money, enough determination and know-how, and you start from zero your nuclear program, in 5 years you can have the bomb.
The Israelis conclude that so long as Suleiman is in charge, they remain under threat.
He and his talented bureaucratic and organizational capabilities are still around. So, what do you do?
For Israel, there seems no other option. They have to kill him. But taking out Suleiman will be a far harder task than striking at a static building in the desert. The Syrian general is an incredibly cautious man. His movements are a closely guarded secret, known to only a few. In Damascus, he is under armed guard. getting to him there will be impossible. But in midsummer 2008, Mossad discovered that Suleiman is planning to spend a weekend at his second home, a villa in the Syrian coastal city of Tartus. Security in Tartus is far more relaxed. If they're going to kill the general, this is the time and place to do it. But it will require another of Israel's Black Ops units to carry it out. This group are called the Kidon.
Kidon means bayonet. They were known within the Mossad for assassinations, but also knew how to slip in and out of countries.
Among even their enemies, they are respected as extremely talented and well-trained in the operations theater.
The Kidon is the most secretive of all Israel's elite units, and almost no operational details of their missions have ever been released by any Israeli government. They are notorious for one specialist activity: assassinating Israel's enemies, wherever they may be. When Canadian weapons expert Gerald Bull was found to be working with Saddam Hussein, he soon met with an untimely end. This was widely regarded to be the work of the Kidon.
They also have taken out dozens of Iranian scientists, dozens of North Korean scientists and engineers, dozens of Syrian scientists and engineers.
There is no unit in Israel better suited to conducting a high-level assassination abroad than the Kidon. This is the unit that many believe are charged with planning the assassination of General Mohammed Suleiman. It seems, as the Kidon study Suleiman's villa, they realize that although well guarded from the street, from the sea, the rear of the villa is totally exposed. The Israelis then discover that when staying at his villa, Suleiman hosts his guests on the balcony overlooking the sea. Initially, they consider bringing a boat close enough to shore for a sniper to target Suleiman from the boat. But it seems this plan is rejected. They will only have one chance, and a long-range shot from a moving boat is just too risky.
The further out the shot, the harder it is to get a headshot. When you're taking a shot from a boat of a guy on land, it's a little bit of a harder mission.
The only other option is to send someone onto shore. A yacht sails up the Mediterranean coast towards Tartus. It is registered to a wealthy businessman, but today the crew are said to be carrying 2 Kidon snipers.
They sent in one of their intelligence assassination teams in a ship off the coast of Tartus, off the coast of Syria.
Around a kilometer off the coast, the yacht drops its sails, and the assassins make their way to shore.
Snipers from the ship came as scuba divers to his beach house.
At the same time, General Suleiman arrives at his weekend home. As the sun sets, it seems the snipers emerge from the water. They watch the guests as they mingle on the terrace. They know that their dark figures are invisible to anyone from above, but they still cannot see Suleiman. Eventually, Suleiman appears.
He was having dinner at his country home along the sea. His friends and family were sitting around the dinner table.
As the general entertains his guests, the two snipers line him up in their crosshairs. They get ready to take the shot. But then, their target is obscured. They move to a new position. The two snipers relocate and aim their rifles. They have earpieces in, which can hear an electronic countdown. This will ensure they fire simultaneously.
It was a difficult shot, but they did shoot until he was down, and the mission was over, and they got away with it.
Both bullets had found their target. One in the head, one in the neck. Like the bombing of the reactor, Israel will never officially admit to the assassination of General Suleiman.
The Israelis do not talk publicly about killing people overseas because it's actually against the rules. But they do say things, including in this incident, they referred to it as a very happy accident. That was actually an official statement.
Taking out the threat of a Syrian nuclear weapons program has been an extraordinary accomplishment, calling upon 3 elite special forces units. The Sayeret Matkal to identify the threat, the Hapatashim to take it out, and the Kidon to ensure that it cannot return. Thanks to these operations, a dangerous and volatile regime has been stopped from acquiring the most dangerous of all weapons of mass destruction. The importance of that has only been made more evident since 2011. When Syria began its descent into a vicious civil war. A deadly group of terrorists has set up a base deep inside Iraq. They have been cooking up chemical weapons and need to be taken out. So an elite special forces unit, the Green Berets, are sent in.
It's something I think every SF guy aspires to. You want to be at the very tip of the spear, be the front element.
They have to work with a group of local guerrilla fighters.
We were like, oh, wow, all right, now it's on. We got some hardened fighters.
In challenging, mountainous terrain.
They knew this was going to be a very difficult fight.
This is the inside story of Operation Viking Hammer. How a small group of men defy the odds in pursuit of one of the most important counter-terrorism missions of the Iraq War. It's the first hours of Operation Iraqi Freedom. In Baghdad, Saddam Hussein's regime is being hit with a devastating shock and awe bombardment. The Iraqi capital is pummeled for hours by multi-million-dollar high-tech weaponry. What few Americans realize is their military planners are also targeting a different problem that is hundreds of miles to the north. It is in a mountainous area known as Iraqi Kurdistan, close to the Iranian border. The enemy are not Saddam's soldiers, but a hardcore group of Islamist terrorists, Ansar al-Islam, the Fighters of Islam. They have close links to the most wanted terrorist network in the world, Al-Qaeda, responsible for some of the most notorious atrocities of recent times.
They suspected that they had major Al-Qaeda connections, that there were a range of foreign jihadists.
Among its 800 members are battle-hardened veterans of the war in Afghanistan.
They were well armed with RPGs and mortars and machine guns, the Soviet style and Iranian and Iraqi weaponry.
It is also rumored they have a chemical weapons lab, manufacturing ricin, a poison made from castor beans. The problem facing the US military is the terrorists are deep inside enemy territory.
Ansar al-Islam was nested in an area called the Halabja salient in the eastern part of Iraq, right on the border with Iran.
They were along the mountainous ridgeline that formed the Iraqi border with Iran. They dominated the key terrain in that area.
It's time to call in a unit that's skilled in operating behind enemy lines and which is perfect for this mission, the Green Berets.
Their entire mission and operation revolves around the conduct of unconventional warfare.
Based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the Green Berets were set up over 60 years ago.
The Green Berets were officially established in June of 1952.
They first came to prominence in the Vietnam War.
They were increased greatly in size during the Vietnam War and sent there to do a number of missions.
Like many special forces, they are highly trained and multi-skilled. They are able to use a variety of deadly weapons systems. Entry requirements are rigorous.
They must be airborne qualified, so they have to go to airborne school. And then they go through a very arduous selection process for the special forces. The great majority of those applicants do not make it through the training.
What makes the Green Berets different to other special forces is that they are specialists in fighting alongside local troops, deep behind enemy lines.
The Green Berets are the Army's unconventional warfare experts. They are trained to work with host nation or indigenous forces.
The Green Berets have to have all of the technical soldiering skills, but they're also expected to be experts in the languages, cultures, and politics of the regions that they go to. They're expected to act as diplomats to engage with the people on the ground.
The aim is that the Green Berets mentor local indigenous forces and supplement their firepower with American know-how. This is what's known as force multiplication.
The force multiplying aspect really are two parts. One is the ability to organize, train, motivate, and lead these indigenous forces, and also to bring in and employ the different larger weapon systems, air operations, close air support, those kind of things that are available.
If there is one man perfect for the mission against Ansar al-Islam, it's Lieutenant Colonel Ken Tovo. He typifies the Green Berets. He's a highly experienced operator and commander of the Green Berets' 3rd Battalion.
Ken Tovo is a very polished individual. He really did personify kind of the diplomat warrior.
He is the man chosen to lead what will become known as Operation Viking Hammer. What makes Tovo especially valuable is that he has previous experience of Kurdistan from the 1991 Gulf War. Tovo has already identified which local force he will work with. Tovo's aim is to harness the firepower of thousands of local fighters. The Kurdish guerrilla forces known as the Peshmerga. The Kurds are a different ethnic group from Iraqi Arabs. The Peshmerga have been fighting a war of resistance against Saddam Hussein for years. They occupy a small enclave in northern Iraq. Since the first Gulf War, it is protected by a no-fly zone enforced by American and Allied jets.
The partners in this case were the PUK, or the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, was the Kurdish entity and the Kurdish armed forces that Tovo was partnering with. And the job of Operation Viking Hammer and their Kurdish Peshmerga partners was to go down this valley into this mountainous area and root out Ansar al-Islam.
Tovo's plan is that a small group of Green Berets will lead the Kurdish attack. They will operate in small, flexible teams of up to 12 men, called ODAs, Operational Detachments Alpha, or A-teams. One team is chosen to spearhead the whole operation. ODA 081. It is led by Brian Rowan, a young captain at the time.
My role during the mission was the detachment commander. Operation Viking Hammer was my first deployment, my first combat deployment as a Special Forces team leader. I had just graduated the qualification course about a year prior and was assigned to ODA 081 as the team leader.
Alongside him are a number of veteran NCOs.
I had a great group of NCOs. They were all very much more experienced than I. They're all senior sergeants with years and years of experience.
Among them is Senior Sergeant Grit.
He was about 7 years older than me, about 36 at the time, I believe. He had a lot of experience, really brought a sense of competency to the team. And then you had the specialties. I had 2 weapons sergeants, both incredibly skilled snipers. Both sergeants first class, both very competent, medical sergeant, and an engineering sergeant.
The communications man is Blake Kramer.
I was the senior communications sergeant. Most people would probably look at being shot at as not being okay. It was something that was expected, and I was okay with it.
But first, Tovo and his Green Berets arrange to meet the PUK leadership. They have to win them over if Operation Viking Hammer is to have any chance of success. Within hours of arriving in northern Iraq, Ken Tovo and his Green Berets travel to the PUK headquarters in the town of Halabja.
We were focused on linking up with our partners, the PUK, specifically the Peshmerga leadership. We were excited. We were part of that lead element. Getting in there and getting to be one of the first onto the ground was something I think every SF guy aspires to.
The Kurds have a long history of opposing Saddam Hussein. In 1988, he infamously gassed the Kurdish population of Halabja, the town where Tovo is heading to meet the Kurdish leaders. More recently, Halabja and the Kurdish outposts have been the victim of suicide bombings and regular mortar attacks from the Ansar al-Islam positions. So the CIA has been trying to make sure the Americans will be welcomed with open arms by the locals. For 12 months, the agency has sent bundles of cash and what it calls lethal aid, guns and ammunition. But when Tovo meets the Kurds, he finds they will need persuading.
So they met up in Halabja and began to plan how they were going to take on Ansar al-Islam.
The first problem Tovo faces is cultural. The Kurds are a warrior people. Their name, Peshmerga, means he who faces death. The Kurds sport moustaches and view any clean-shaven outsider as an inexperienced child, while the Americans must maintain strict grooming standards at all times.
There really was a warrior culture within the Kurdish people. Most young men felt compelled to do their duty fighting and would enlist or join for periods of time in the Peshmerga. It really is a badge of honor in that culture.
The Kurds have even deeper reasons to distrust the Americans. Ten years earlier, after the First Gulf War, the Kurds rose up in revolution and had expected America to send troops to help them. But they didn't. Instead, Saddam Hussein led a ruthless fight back, slaughtering the Peshmerga and thousands of civilians. For their part, the Americans view the Peshmerga with similar caution. They are not professional soldiers and lack military discipline compared to the Americans. For Brian Rowan, the first impressions are not great.
They're not what you would expect from an American soldier perspective. They're typically, wearing baggy clothes. I think we call them MC Hammer pants. Tennis shoes, maybe an AK-47 or some other weapon they were able to get. A big bushy mustache, almost invariably, and then a head wrap. They didn't have radios. Maybe they'd have a little handheld or a cell phone, and that was it.
Both sides must win each other's respect. The Green Berets have a plan that will show the Kurds that they mean business. Ken Tovo will do it all with a simple click of a mouse. On the night of the 21st of March 2003, Tovo and his team head towards a lookout near the terrorists' mountain base. The Green Berets and the Kurds take up position. The laptop and SATCOMs are set up. Mysterious numbers are typed in. The Kurds then wait an anxious 15 minutes for something to happen.
The Special Forces group provided the targets, provided the coordinates.
So you're sitting there, you're watching, you know that the missiles have been launched, you're waiting. And all of a sudden you hear this. And they fly over. And then just one after another. And you just hear them all flying right over your head, which is amazing and a little bit terrifying at the same time. You just hope that one doesn't fall short. But these things all fly over and they hit.
They just watched as the night sky lit up.
It was cool.
The first Tomahawk missiles flattened the base, killing several terrorists. In just a few minutes, American technology and air power wins the Kurds' respect.
I think that our resolve was a little in question, but at that point, definitely when the Tomahawks started coming in, they definitely knew we were there, we were gonna be by their sides, and it wasn't just all talk.
However, the missiles cause a new problem. The Ansar fighters retreat from their positions. They know they cannot take on the Tomahawks, so they simply pull back.
As soon as the missiles began to impact, the teams could see the AAI loading up on trucks, abandoning their positions.
They were smart enough to get out of them and move away.
They had a series of defensive positions that they were able to fall back to.
The Ansar fighters move back to other defensive positions around the nearby village of Sargat. There, they start to dig in.
Sargat was the main stronghold of Ansar al-Islam. It was down in the valley, but it was ringed by mountains.
The terrorists have built trench systems and bunkers in the hills and mountains overlooking the area.
It's very, very mountainous, very rocky, little vegetation in the area, very few accessible road networks.
The Ansar terrorists are well supplied with heavy weapons. These include heavy-caliber Russian machine guns called dushkas, as well as mortars and heavy cannon. It looks like they're determined to fight to the death. A ground assault could be a bloodbath. This is something that concerns the Kurdish leader, Jalal Talabani. He suddenly decides to pull out of the whole operation.
Talabani got cold feet right before they launched this attack, and Tovo left to go visit him at his headquarters.
With the operation in the balance, Ken Tovo and the Green Berets have to explain how they will do it and avoid Kurdish casualties. He uses a detailed terrain model to outline every aspect and talk through the risks and the battle plan. The Green Berets will work closely with a force of 7,000 Peshmerga. Because the enemy occupy multiple positions, each covering the other, the Green Berets and Kurds have to strike in a simultaneous, multi-pronged attack. So he puts forward a plan to spread the Green Berets between the Peshmerga to coordinate the attack. The Green Berets use cards to plot out exactly how the mission will work. The plan is that 6 different prongs will move through the area. Each prong has a color: black, orange, red, and so on. Yellow prong will be the main thrust moving along the valley floor.
Yellow prong was the main effort that was going straight up the valley into Gulp and then on to Sargat.
Green prong will clear the ridgelines overlooking the valley.
The green prong was going to split off and go up on the high ground, up on the mountain ridge, and their role was to provide cover for the force proceeding down the valley floor into Sargat.
With the entire mission in doubt, all eyes are on the Kurdish leader, Jalal Talabani, as he takes it all in.
Tovo reassured him that they had done all of the reconnaissance, that they were prepared to fight in an effective way. So Talabani said, okay, I believe you, I trust you, go ahead and launch the attack.
Six Green Beret ODAs will be involved in the attack. But the task of spearheading it falls to ODA 081. It's a nervous time for Sergeant Blake Kramer.
I remember not getting much sleep at all the night prior. Just had, tons of things running through my mind, all the what ifs, all the contingencies.
Despite having only 10 men in his team, Captain Rowan divides them between the main Yellow Prong, whose objective is the village of Sargat, and Green Prong, who are heading into the hills.
We actually split the team, where 6 of us went with the Yellow Prong and 3 went with the Green Prong. And that's pretty typical for an ODA. You're designed, again, to be able to cope with uncertain situations. Because you're essentially like a multi-tool, you can reconfigure as necessary, and you bring to bear all the skills you need.
Brian Rowan will have with him 2 important Kurds, a general, Sheikh Jaffa, in charge of the Peshmerga, and the son of the PUK leader, Bafal Talabani, who will act as their interpreter. On the 28th of March, everyone is set. For some of the Green Berets, it's the first time they have met the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. Many of the Americans have changed their appearance and grown moustaches to blend in and gain more respect from their Kurdish allies.
We met on the battlefield that morning. You look up and there's 7,000 Peshmerga and all the Special Forces guys standing around waiting to mass up and link up with our elements.
It's also the first chance for the Green Berets to comprehend the task ahead.
When the sun comes up and you see the mountains with snow and just the sheer magnitude of them, it makes you realize just what a dangerous place you're about to go into.
The terrain was just very steep, rocky mountains with a little bit of green scrub on it. You had the snow, you had the ice melt. It was very muddy, slippery.
And that really brought out the reality of how tough this was going to be, particularly given that their positions, the Ansar al-Islam positions, were in depth going up the mountain. So anything we were doing was going to be attacking uphill in mountainous terrain that was incredibly rugged and cold.
Before the column moves off, Ken Tovo heads back to the command center to coordinate the operation from there. The operation is so complex that radio communication is the only way that Tovo and his officers can keep track of all the different prongs. They must keep in regular contact with all the Green Berets to monitor their positions and avoid friendly fire accidents, so-called blue-on-blue casualties. Once the teams are in position and away from danger, he gets stuck in by ordering a preliminary bombardment by jets and fighter bombers to soften up the Ansar positions. The ground assault column moves off, and the Green Berets head towards Sargat with the Peshmerga. The main thrust, Yellow Prong, must first capture a village called Gulp.
The town of Gulp was a small little checkpoint area that was at the foot of the valley.
But the enemy are waiting.
As the Kurdish force started moving up the hill into Gulp, they came under some pretty heavy fire.
You could hear the guns firing, and then you would see a little bit of rounds impacting around. You would hear some bullets whizzing by. It started getting a little bit more intense, more accurate. It was enough to get you on your toes and realize that you were in the game.
In my particular prong, I had a general called Sheikh Jafar. And he was the one who was giving the orders to the Kurds.
The Kurds suddenly stop.
Sheikh Jafar basically says, you know, what are we going to do? You saw all the Kurdish force literally squat down and stop.
The Peshmerga had come under fire from the Ansar al-Islam forces and stopped cold in their tracks.
This is not good. We need to maintain the momentum. We need to, keep moving forward. How are we going to do this?
To turn the situation around, Captain Rowan calls on backup and summons an airstrike.
They got on the radio, they called for help, and a Navy F-18 replied with 500-pound JDAMs.
That was probably the sweetest sound we had ever heard.
You could just tell, it just sent this wave of euphoria or confidence that they had, this huge force behind them.
That was enough to rally the Peshmerga. They pushed on into Gulp.
Inside Gulp, the Peshmerga fight house to house to clear it. It is now that the local forces impress the Green Berets. The Kurdish fighters are armed only with AK-47s and a few magazines of ammunition. But their bravery is astonishing.
There was a guy, a Kurd, assaulting with a cane. He'd sling his weapon, he'd grab his cane, and he'd get to the next rock wall, he'd lay down, he'd turn and look at me and give me a thumbs up, lay there, unsling his AK-47, roll back over, and start shooting.
Compared to the Green Berets, their tactics are simple. They're always on the attack, never pausing so as not to lose momentum. If a Kurd is wounded, he is expected to make his own way to medical treatment. The Peshmerga soon overrun and capture Gulp. It has taken just over an hour, but Objective 1 has been secured. With the mission running ahead of schedule, the Kurds hold a team talk.
Sheikh Jafar pulled them all in and talked to them about how they had done very well fighting this far, and essentially gave them this motivational speech, talking through about the importance of fighting bravely, living up to their heritage. We're known as warriors. This is our chance to fight with our American brethren.
But the Green Berets soon realize that Gulp is the easy bit. They are about to enter the hornet's nest, Sargat.
I think that's when it really hit me. We had the translator with us, and he was letting us know what Sheikh Jafar was talking to him about in Kurdish. And it was really hitting home with me that we are getting ready to enter the crux of the battle.
The Green Berets move on again. But the problem at Sargat is the terrain. Ansar al-Islam holds the high ground.
They were shooting down, it was almost like shooting down into fish in a barrel. It was the absolute worst place and the wrong place to be.
It was a horseshoe shape, and all along that top of the horseshoe was sporadic fighting positions that were heavily dug in and fortified, and they were mutually supporting. And then they all had some type of crew-served weapon, mortar tube, or some type of heavy gun that could rain down fire on us.
And all of a sudden we started taking a whole lot of fire. Heavy fire. And when you hear the Dishkas and the PKM rounds hit and the mud that was around us is just this thickening thwack, 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 thwack. And it starts hitting all around us.
We were within range of countless targets or countless positions, and it was just, it was unreal.
This time, Captain Rowan can't summon an airstrike. Calling in air support risks blowing up his own men and his Kurdish allies. The Green Berets will have to seize control and fight their way out.
They were going to have to deal with this problem themselves.
Captain Rowan comes up with a plan.
The snipers that I had with me, the weapons sergeant, he immediately started putting precision fire on some of the positions.
The weapons sergeants use an M82 Barrett 50 cal. A heavy long-range sniper rifle that can take out a target nearly 2 kilometers away. Using the rifle, they pick off the enemy one man at a time. Thanks to the snipers, the Green Berets can move on. Next stop is the village of Sargat. The fighting is even more intense.
The battle for Sargat was extremely ferocious.
It was enough for us to know that we didn't need to stay there. These weren't rounds that were flying well over our head. They were within feet.
Just tracer fire and bullets hitting all around on the road, rocks disintegrating from bullet fire impacts. We could hear them start launching mortars at us.
Captain Rowan wound up in the front of the force as they entered Sargat.
With Rowan and his men bogged down, Grit and another weapons sergeant decide they need more firepower. So they grab the heavy machine gun.
Fortunately, in the truck, we had with us still our 50 cal heavy machine gun. So the team sergeant and some of the other sergeants were able to get that out.
They had to get a good sight line against the Ansar al-Islam positions. 50 caliber machine gun, very heavy weapon. Fired about 700 rounds to neutralize one of the main positions that was firing down on them.
Meanwhile, Blake Kramer is laying down suppressing fire with a light machine gun.
We just opened up with a machine gun, shooting at different enemy targets and positions, trying to kind of generate that camaraderie and, hey, I'm in it with you and let's do this. Combined with the 50 and our machine gun, we were able to rally those guys up and start moving into the valley.
The Green Berets also get the Kurds to bring up their own heavy guns.
They had one flatbed truck that had a dual-barreled 23mm gun on it. This thing was huge. And the truck would drive up, it'd kind of park sideways, they'd shoot the gun, and the truck would rock way back as they'd shoot this thing. It's incredibly inaccurate, but scary as heck.
Now, back in the village of Sargat, Captain Rowan leads from the front.
Captain Rowan, meanwhile, was down on the ground, literally leading the charge. He later found out that he'd forgotten to put the back plate in his armored vest. So he was really kind of a sitting duck.
It was a miracle that we didn't get hit. We've got gunfire mortars all around us. And I look over at our interpreter that was with us, and he's on his cell phone. And he's calling back, talking to, I believe it was his cousin, and he was letting him know that we were in it. Are you serious? Are you on the phone right now? Get off the phone. We're in the middle of all this. I thought that was quite comical at the time.
These soldiers fought incredibly valiantly. The Americans are really out there, outgunned, and having to fight from the low ground to the high ground.
Finally, after 4 hours, they enter Sargat. As they search the village, the Americans find passports from foreign fighters from Sudan, Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia.
After we went in, we identified, there was chemical suits, there were some atropine injectors, other things that were a bit unusual.
Critically, the Americans also find some evidence of chemical weapons manufacture. Residues of ricin, the poison made from castor beans.
They found a number of other indications that Ansar al-Islam had actually been trying to develop some chemical weapons capability there.
It is the first serious evidence anywhere in Iraq of a link between al-Qaeda and weapons of mass destruction. The US forces orchestrate a press conference and tell the world all about the raid and the incriminating evidence they have found. But no mention is made of the role the Green Berets played in the discovery.
At that time, no one knew what a ferocious battle had been waged up the valley to get to Sargat. So this full story of the battle only came out years later.
Now the Peshmerga and Special Forces A-teams are functioning well. They have earned each other's respect. The guerrillas also know that their partners, in their heavily armed pickups, are a formidable unit.
And morale is pretty high, because now they're in Sargat. This is the home of Ansar al-Islam.
The battle seems almost over. So for now, the Kurds and Green Berets halt their advance as darkness falls. However, the remnants of the Ansar fighters withdraw again. Their destination? The caves above Sargat. Here, they plan to lay a trap for the Americans and the Peshmerga. They will use the caves as fortified bunkers. As dawn breaks, the Ansar al-Islam fighters settle into their positions in and around the caves.
The next morning, we continued on with our push. There were huge cave complexes. I mean, there was just multiple caves.
As they approach, the Green Berets come under fire.
We received some gunfire back, and we were like, oh wow, all right, now it's on. Again, you know, we got some hardened fighters. We've been firing fully automatic into these caves, and we couldn't drive these guys out, and they were continually shooting at us.
The Green Berets and their allies become pinned down. Realizing they have to do something, they come up with a plan to flush the enemy out of their stronghold.
We just secured the front of the cave, made sure nobody could get out. And sent one guy back for an anti-tank round, put it into action, and we backed off from the cave a little bit. We just collapsed it in.
"70 Ansar fighters are killed that day. The last diehards are taken down. Three days after the operation began, the Green Berets watched the final stragglers of Ansar al-Islam retreat across the border into Iran. The terrorists have been neutralized. Ansar al-Islam is defeated, for now at least. Only a handful survive the onslaught. With their heavy weapons lost and their infrastructure and ricin lab dealt a death blow, there is little left of the threat first targeted days earlier. After just 8 days of intense action in Kurdistan, the Green Berets have completed their counter-terrorism mission.
In the end, ODA 081 was awarded 3 Silver Stars and 6 Bronze Stars. And this was, without doubt, the most ferocious battle the Special Forces had fought since Vietnam.
In the next few days, they link up with other forces and target Iraqi units in northern Iraq. In early April, the city of Kirkuk falls to Tovo's men. The conventional Iraqi units there didn't even put up a fight. In conjunction with other American forces, northern Iraq is secured, and the way is opened for tanks to move into Baghdad 3 weeks after hostilities began. 2 years later, the PUK leader who worked with Tovo, Jalal Talabani, is elected the first Kurdish president of Iraq. Operation Viking Hammer will go down as a classic Green Berets operation.
Viking Hammer can be looked at as a textbook application of the training.
At its heart was the doctrine of persuading local forces to fight alongside small American teams, bringing in devastating air power, and fighting deep behind the lines.
To fight a battle uphill in a mountainous area with indigenous forces as your main body, you come out of that with no casualties and very, very few problems is a remarkable achievement.
I think the operation overall was a success in many ways. We took absolutely no casualties for U.S.
and for the small, close-knit teams fighting in the northern sector of Iraq. They may not have received as much media coverage, but it's still a source of immense pride.
I was just fortunate enough to be a part of it, and every guy on that team played a huge, huge part of that day.
It's something I'll never, ever forget. And moments like that, when you've got 5 other guys on your left or right flank, I couldn't have been blessed with a better group of men to have the fortune to lead during combat.
Operation Viking Hammer was really the opening act of many incredible battles that the Special Forces fought, not only in 2003, but for the next 10 years. They have really been engaged in numerous incredible firefights and battles. So what you have now is the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces are absolutely the most battle-tested force in U.S. history.
A force of elite American troops on board Black Hawk helicopters strike into the heart of the city of Mogadishu, Somalia.
We were invincible, we were Superman, and these were the Captain Kirks of Army aviation.
Their task, to abduct 2 sidekicks of a brutal Somali warlord.
We just came out of nowhere and dropped into the city.
This Special Forces mission is supposed to last less than an hour. But the operation spirals out of control.
We got a Black Hawk down! We got a Black Hawk down!
And then everything changed. Then it became a whole nother mission.
Thousands of Somalis surround the troops trapped inside enemy territory.
Once that Black Hawk crashed, it was immense. It was a mob.
The Americans launch a rescue mission that will push them to the limit.
The hornet's nest, so to speak, had been stirred up, and we were receiving fire at every intersection.
The battle would become the legend of Black Hawk Down. On the east coast of Africa lies the country of Somalia. Its capital city, Mogadishu. It is about to witness one of the bloodiest chapters in its history. US forces are launching a raid into a slum neighborhood near the city's Bakara market. On board the helicopters are the elite Special Forces unit, Task Force Ranger. Their mission, to capture and extract 2 henchmen of a suspected war criminal.
It was pretty simple. To get in, capture the targets, and to get out. If the leadership of the country said, this is what we want you guys to go do, that's what I wanted to go do.
For the young American soldiers, it's just another day at the office.
We were certainly mentally prepared for it, and we were certainly ready for whatever that they could throw at us.
We went where we wanted to go, and there wasn't anyone there that could tell us or make us do otherwise. There simply wasn't.
24 Pakistani UN.
3 miles away at the American headquarters, senior officers are directing the raid. Heading up Task Force Ranger is 2-star General William Garrison.
William Garrison was an expert infantryman. He had served in the airborne. He had been an advisor in Vietnam.
Garrison has fought battles all over the world for nearly 3 decades.
General Garrison was a very much well-respected in the field of special forces.
Despite his men's confidence, Garrison is experienced enough to know this mission is full of risk. He's sending Task Force Ranger into one of the most dangerous cities in the world. But if it succeeds, he will strike a blow against one of the most ruthless men in Somalia. Mohammed Farah Aidid. Aidid hits the headlines in 1992 when he tries to seize control of a famine-ravaged Somalia. A United Nations relief force, including American troops, arrives to help feed the starving millions. But Aidid's clan attempt to control the supply of food.
Food was power. Clans would raid food convoys, take food, distribute it onto their own members. This then forced the United Nations to look at security measures.
Aidid's men massacre 24 UN peacekeepers. It makes him a wanted man. But Aidid just disappears.
General Aidid had basically gone underground. And so some of the thoughts of Task Force Ranger was, if we can't get Aidid, let's look for the lieutenants.
Garrison has intelligence that two of Aidid's most trusted associates have been spotted in Mogadishu. These are the men the Task Force Ranger have been sent in to snatch.
If you could cut off those leaders, then that would make it very tough for Aidid.
Garrison's Task Force Ranger seems perfect for this extraction mission. At its heart are the Rangers, the US Army's elite light infantry. Fighting alongside them are highly trained helicopter teams and members of the secretive Special Forces unit, Delta Force.
Delta is arguably the best in the world of special operations. So when we're engaging what we considered gangs or street-level thugs, the battle was ours to lose.
The assault force of 160 men knows exactly what's expected of them. The mission has been planned to the finest detail. It is supposed to last less than an hour.
Speed and surprise was the most important elements of any of these raids.
Delta operators will land on the target building in Little Bird helicopters, storm inside and arrest Aidid's men. At the same time, Ranger units known as Chalks will rope in from Black Hawk helicopters. Chalks 1, 2, 3, and 4 will each secure a corner of the building and form a defensive perimeter. A convoy will drive to the target building, pick up the prisoners and the assault team, and bring them back to base. The operation will be monitored live from Garrison's headquarters. Video cameras mounted on helicopters follow the men as they go into action. By mid-afternoon, the airborne assault force has maneuvered above the target building. On board, Rangers Kenny Thomas and Randy Romalia prepare to fast rope in.
Very orchestrated and very rehearsed. Kick the rope out and then everybody just starts going. And it's a very fast and very efficient way to get people out.
We just came out of nowhere and dropped into the city. And it was almost that calm before the storm.
The Rangers secure the area around the target building. Inside, the Delta team move in on Aidid's men. It's no contest.
It took Delta Force about 15 minutes or so to get everybody secured.
The raid is going like clockwork.
They brought all the guys out of the building and we were like, yes, we scored. Like we knew we had done a good thing. So that left us on the target, waiting for our ride.
With the exception of one injured private, the Special Operations mission is a massive success.
It was another Sunday drive home that you would be able to complete the mission and let's go home now, boys.
The Americans and their prisoners begin to load up onto the convoy, but the Somalis are quickly amassing forces. Chalk 3, the Ranger unit including Kenny Thomas and Randy Romalia, are waiting near the target building. Soon, they are taking fire.
It started with one weapon being fired at you from one direction to multiple directions.
But it really wasn't that bad at that point. The reason it wasn't bad, it was because they were missing.
But as Kenny discovers, the Somalis are becoming more accurate.
I was on a knee firing down the road and it hit me right here. Bam, it just knocked me backwards.
And I looked over and Kenny is holding a magazine and shaking.
I thought the thing was gonna blow up or something. So I'm pulling the magazine. I looked over across the street and Randy's over there. He's like almost laughing at me because he must have looked silly to him.
And the magazine kept that round from going through and hitting him in the chest. The center mass shot on Kenny.
And there's a perfect hole in it, and then on the back side, the whole back end of it's blown out. And you're like, wow, it's a game of inches, you know?
Every second the Americans spend in the danger zone gives the Somalis time to bring in more militiamen. And they have a lethal surprise for Task Force Ranger.
I looked up and I saw the black smoke coming from the tail section of the Black Hawk, and it went into a spin.
It looked odd. Like it shouldn't be flying like that. In the back of your mind, you knew that it was going down.
Heard it impact.
We got a Black Hawk crash in the city. Black Hawk crash in the city.
We're just waiting to go home when the first helicopter got shot down, and then everything changed. Then it became a whole nother mission.
The Somalis near the crash site swarm towards the injured men of the downed helicopter.
You saw masses of people blocks away from us moving in that direction.
At his headquarters, Garrison and his team watch the disaster unfold. Among his staff is Ranger Larry Moores.
It was very busy, especially once the helicopter crashed in the city. Everybody's anxiety goes up a notch. We are very focused on how can we evacuate everybody from the city.
The two pilots are dead, but there are some survivors at the site.
Now General Garrison has to react. He has to now put in forces. This is a major concern because where the shoot-down occurred.
The situation is all the more difficult because the helicopter has crashed deep inside hostile territory.
Task Force Ranger is in an urban area that might be very difficult to get forces in and conversely get forces out.
Garrison orders another helicopter to drop medics and snipers onto the crash site. But that just buys time. He will also have to divert the convoy that's loaded up with the prisoners to pick up the survivors. But no one knows how long the convoy will take to arrive. He mobilizes the Rangers and Delta operators that are still on the ground near the target building. They follow orders to move to the crash site and form a protective cordon as soon as they can. Chalk 3, with Randy Romalia and Kenny Thomas, are just 500 yards away from the crash site.
And immediately you knew. You would run to help them. That would be your immediate reaction. Go help them. You see the bird coming down, we gotta go.
But Task Force Ranger's raid has already stirred up a hornet's nest.
So you have a whole mobilized city that could potentially be used against you at the crash site.
There was a sense of urgency for sure, because you could see people moving down on the side streets heading towards the crash. So it was a foot race.
It's now their Ranger training kicks in.
Each man goes up to the wall, up to the corner, and you run across, one at a time.
It's shoot, move, communicate, put you guys in a position where they can get an effective field of fire, identify the bad guys. It was very automatic. We all knew what we needed to do.
As the American troops move close to the crash site, the fire intensifies.
I heard like a shrieking yell, and I looked over and I saw a Delta operator. His head flipped back and he just fell. It was probably the shortest, most violent thing I've ever witnessed. You remembered that we really viewed Delta as the supermen. The only thing they didn't have were capes. So to see him shot and dropped like that was very sobering.
When people start going down and you see how matter-of-fact the death is, you realize, oh, well, if I die here, I die here. But I'm not gonna let it happen to the guys around me. Man, we weren't fighting for the flag, and we weren't fighting for freedom. At this point, you're fighting for each other. That's it. And that's when I turned around and went back and I was like, hey, you guys take care of each other. We're gonna make it out of here. That's the only way we're gonna make it out of here.
Kenny and Randy's unit continue to fight their way towards the Americans at the crash site, but they're still a block away. All the while, the Somalis are gaining in confidence and numbers.
We're coming under heavy fire.
At headquarters, General Garrison gets more bad news. The convoy that's been diverted towards the crash site has run into trouble.
Unfortunately, because of problems with direction, the convoy actually became lost within the city. Then add on people shooting at you, add on blockades of roads. It becomes a very difficult job.
Garrison realizes it will take far longer than he thought to get the convoy to the men at the crash site. He will have to use helicopters to support them for now, and this is risky. Somalis lie in wait with rocket-propelled grenades all over the city. A half-mile away from the crash site, a second Black Hawk is targeted. Garrison and his team watch in horror as the second helicopter goes down.
We got another helicopter down. We need combat search and rescue.
When the second one went in, it just ramped up the intensity.
Again, there are survivors. One of them is the Black Hawk's pilot, Mike Durant.
Whatever it took, whatever force we needed to put together, we were going to do that and bring everybody back off of the objectives.
Another Black Hawk ropes in 2 Delta snipers to protect Durant and his crew. They are quickly surrounded. The 2 Black Hawks have crashed half a mile away from each other. making the rescue mission even harder. And the convoy is still unable to break through to the first crash site. Half its force is now either wounded or dead.
We kept hearing on the radio the amount of casualties. All I wanted to do was be out there with them and be a part of the effort.
Garrison reaches a devastating decision. The rescue convoy is becoming combat ineffective. He has no choice but to pull them out. Back at the first crash site, Kenny Thomas hears that the convoy is being hauled back to base.
I can't believe it's happening. But the reality of it is that it is happening, and now what are you going to do about it?
Most of the American troops have made it to the roads and alleys surrounding the first crashed Black Hawk. Now, they begin to form a defensive perimeter around the downed aircraft and wounded men.
It was just putting guys in the right vantage points to minimize the amount of fire we were receiving from the enemy.
Kenny and Randy's Chalk 3 take up their positions near a main road. They are surrounded by a baying mob. They have to find a way to hold them off. So they turn to the squad's M60 heavy machine gun.
We needed that M60 there. And we were going to do whatever it took to keep that M60 there.
Enemy fire strikes the M60 gunner. Kenny takes over.
There was these two guys that were just popping their heads up over a little retaining wall. Just popping up and doing the Mogadishu machine gun man, which is not even aiming, and just spraying rounds. So I got behind the gun, I waited for those guys to stick their heads up and fired off a couple rounds, like, bap, bap, bap. And then the gun goes click, click, chick, chick, chick. And I'm like, what the? It's out of rounds. Everybody's yelling at me, use the law. And I'm like, what? Because the law. And I had been carrying around this light anti-tank weapon, the law. I'm like, oh, I have a rocket launcher. So he fired it off. And that took down that position.
And that was very effective at dissuading the Somalis from coming back to that corner.
But now, there are fewer than 100 men protecting the crash site. The number of Somalis are steadily growing, and they outnumber the Americans at least 10 to 1. Most of them with close links to Adid's clan.
The Somali clan member believes in clan first and last. They're going to take that to the nth degree, to such an extent that they're willing to die for it.
To make them even more fanatical, some are high on the local drug of choice.
There was some use of an addictive drug called cat. It's almost like being on amphetamine. It's going to provide you that extra oomph or that strength to carry on. You're fighting a tough foe.
We came in with the audacity that we could just kick in doors and take down who we wanted, and they were going to fight back. That's one of the places we went wrong. We completely underestimated their ability to play the game of urban combat.
At the American headquarters, a section of the original convoy struggles back to base. Garrison decides to send it straight back in with reinforcements. Larry Moores gets his chance to fight.
We knew we were going immediately back in, so very difficult to let them know after they'd just been shot up pretty good. Hey, we're heading right back in. There was a nervousness, but there also was a part of the way we do business in the Rangers.
convoy rolls out, but the Somalis are ready.
The Somalis had set up a huge roadblock. There was no maneuvering around. We were hit by a high volume of small arms fire to try and keep us from getting up there to that crash site. It was a pretty constant fight.
Larry and his men try to break through, but the whole of the city is now against them.
The hornet's nest, so to speak, had been stirred up, and we were receiving fire at every intersection. We knew that it was going to be a fight that day.
Larry's convoy is held up in the middle of the city, still short of the second crash site, and even further from the men on the ground at crash site 1. The news of the convoy's slow progress comes through to the men surrounded there.
I could hear the radio transmissions, and I remember we start looking at each other with concern, because we had never been on the ground this long, and the convoy had never received this amount of fire. That was where I really felt, I believe, discouraged.
At his base, General Garrison can see his vehicles cannot find a way through the city's streets. Eventually, he realizes he has no choice but to pull them back to base for a second time.
It must have been a most difficult decision for him, because he knew that potentially if he did nothing to save those individuals, he would have another repeat of maybe a massacre. Conversely, he had to weigh the risk of having even more casualties.
Reluctantly, the men in the convoy follow General Garrison's orders.
From my perspective, I wanted to fight into the objective, but from a leadership perspective, they're making a command and control decision. Do we really want to insert more Humvees who can't support themselves for a long fight? We just create a bigger problem.
The surrounded men at the crash sites are no nearer to being rescued. Night falls on Mogadishu. It's been just 3 hours since the mission began. Near the first crash site, Kenny and Randy defend their positions against the mob in the darkness.
They would fire randomly to try to see your muzzle flash. And then at that point, once they figured out where you were, they would try to maneuver on you.
The Somalis have a critical advantage. They know every inch of ground.
Remember, these are their neighborhoods. They're not our neighborhoods.
The Americans realize they stand no chance on the city's streets.
The thing that obviously made sense, and the Delta guys had already done this, was kick in a door, take over the house, and that's what we needed to do.
The men move inside and steel themselves for a long night ahead. By now, many of the men of Task Force Ranger are regretting not bringing an essential piece of kit into the battle.
We didn't anticipate being on the ground this long. A lot of us didn't bring night vision.
Basically, we got complacent because we were happy not to carry more gear. But we learned it's better to have and not need than to need and not have.
The Americans could have seen their enemy in near total darkness with their night vision goggles. Without them, the Somalis can close in.
The fighting along the crash site is very close combat. It's almost eye to eye, tooth to tooth.
The Americans are now fighting for their lives. At headquarters, General Garrison has already seen his operation descend into chaos. Not only are the men still trapped at the first crash site, but at the second crash site, all the men are either dead or captured. Desperate to salvage something, Garrison concentrates on the first crash site before it's too late. The only way to get his men out is to launch another convoy. But having failed twice, Garrison begins to realize he now needs support from other United Nations troops in Somalia.
How do you get the forces out? Well, you had to rely on something else. That something else were armored vehicles to break through those blockades and to protect the convoy. Who could provide that? It would only be the UN.
Getting this multinational force together will take time. It's something that the men on the ground may not have. Back at the first crash site, the men of Chalk 3 are reaching their lowest ebb.
I was exhausted at this point, and I got against the wall and I just slid onto the floor. And it looked like the floor was wet, and it was. It was wet from blood. You could actually smell the blood in the room. Once I realized I was sitting in it, I was tired enough to where I didn't even care to move. And then I remember picturing the White House at night, just like we've all seen on the news, where it's all lit up in white light at night, beautiful. And I remember thinking, no matter what decision is made there right now, there is nothing that can be done to help us. And that was very sobering, knowing that you're part of the greatest fighting force in the world, and no matter what decision is made at the highest level of government, there is nothing that can be done to help you in that particular situation, or in time to help get you out of that situation.
The Americans are paying the price for their overconfidence before the mission. They are now lacking more than just night goggles.
So at this point in the night, it was quite clear that we were running out of stuff.
They are low on ammunition, food, water, and medical supplies. At Chalk 3's position, one of their men is bleeding to death. They desperately need more morphine and IV bags. They have to be resupplied. Garrison faces another crucial decision. He has already lost 2 Black Hawks in the city, but a helicopter drop is the only way he can resupply his men.
Doing nothing is not an option. So he takes the responsibility. I have to send a helicopter out there to drop supplies, and that's what he does.
Garrison orders the launch of another Black Hawk helicopter. The pilot will need to be guided in by the men on the ground.
You have to land those supplies in a certain area where you can get access to them. You land on the wrong place, then all you're doing is giving supplies to the Somalis.
The mission's success depends on an infrared strobe carried by the American troops. Invisible to the Somalis, this small device's signal allows the pilot to spot the landing zone using his night vision sights. At the crash site, the men prepare for the drop.
This is Super 66 calling in for radio check over. Reading you loud and clear.
The Rangers talk the helicopter in until the pilot can spot the strobe.
Okay, what's my altitude? It's 100 feet into the wind, altitude's good. Okay, that's 75 feet, and you're in a good position.
It looks like it's going to plan. Then, a hail of fire.
Taking small arms fire. Taking small arms fire.
He just had to sit there, hover, and take it. He knows that bird's getting hit, man. Ting, 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 ting. You know, and he has to sit there and take it because he knows there's guys counting on him. It's not about like, I don't know, man, it's pretty hairy. I don't want to go in there. What? Are you kidding me? That's not how it works.
The Black Hawk just manages to stay in the air and makes the drop. The Rangers receive their lifeline.
Well, the bird was hovering right over the building, so they just kicked them out, and it was, you know, much needed supplies that you could argue kept one of our guys alive. You know, he was going low on fluids. They didn't have anything else to keep his body from collapsing, and without IVs, he wouldn't have made it.
The Black Hawk struggles back to base, riddled with bullets. The men on the ground can hold out a while longer. But they need General Garrison to find them a way out. At his headquarters, Garrison has had a breakthrough. Other UN forces have agreed to let him use their tanks and armored personnel carriers in the next convoy.
The Malaysians and the Pakistanis were committed to going in with us, which we give them a lot of credit for. They didn't have any trapped personnel on that objective, but they accepted that role to go out there with us and fight all night.
This heavily armored, multinational convoy will leave from Newport and head into the city. Half of the force will steer towards the second crashed helicopter to blow it up. They want to make sure its high-tech weaponry doesn't fall into enemy hands. The rest will push north towards the surrounded men at the first crash site. The rescue convoy moves out, 8 hours after the original raid was launched. Once again, Larry Moores is going in.
Anybody that was able to go out and fight that night, we took with us. So there was some intel analysts. There was a couple of wounded Rangers who were able to take a cast off their arm because they wanted to be part of the mission.
Corporal Robert Lawhead, a Humvee driver assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, joins the rescue effort.
It didn't matter if it were Special Operations, Rangers, or even the 10th Mountain Division. It was just, we had people in trouble. And at that point, we knew it was us against the country. We didn't have time to think about it. We just did it.
The convoy battles towards the surrounded men. Again, the Somalis are ready.
It was a major firefight from block to block.
They were running out in the street, taking pot shots at us. You could look up on a roof or into a window and see them shooting. You could see guys get shot right in front of you. It was chaos.
This multinational force has never trained together, and the result is confusion.
As people start driving toward the crash site, the first two Malaysian armored vehicles get hit by RPGs.
Under heavy fire, the Malaysians head off in the wrong direction, causing more delay. At the first crash site, the waiting troops are feeling the strain.
There was no mistaking where that convoy was because the exchange of gunfire was unbelievable.
The rescue operation is less than half a mile away, but it may as well be on the other side of Africa.
And the radio is like, they're en route. They're not en route. They're en route. They're not en route. You know, at some point you just gave up.
The convoy battles through the night, for nearly 3 hours.
If you can imagine people on the rooftops and in the alleyways and every door shooting at you, that's what they were trying to get through.
Finally, it breaks through.
I believe at that point we thought it was pretty much over.
And we were all very tired. And you kind of get the sense, okay, well, this thing's finally done. We can get our wounded guys out of here.
The men at the crash site load up their casualties and prepare to head off. Everybody thinks they're about to go home. But General Garrison has one final challenge for them. The Ranger Creed dictates the Americans can't leave a man behind. He wants his men to bring the body of the pilot of the crashed helicopter home.
This was something we had to do. It was the right thing. It was not a question that we were going to leave the body behind.
But the body is still trapped inside the crushed cockpit, and it will take time to free it. The delay could mean they lose the cover of darkness.
It became a fight against time, dismantling that aircraft to remove him, to bring him home with us.
Robert Lawhead's Humvee is called into action to try and free the body from the wreckage.
We would start attaching the tow strap to parts of the helicopter to try to pull, different parts of the frame apart so we could get more free access to the body.
The delay gives the Somalis more time to attack. In the house, Randy and Kenny's nerves are becoming shredded.
Why is it not happening? That's what you want to know. Let's get it done. Ricky Tick, come on. We were all very antsy, yeah, and the bad guys are starting to shoot again.
It was definitely the longest night in my life.
After 3.5 hours, the rescue team finally recovers the dead pilot's body. Only then can they head home.
We're getting the hell out of here. I don't care what's in front of us.
The convoy now has to fight through a heavily defended maze of streets towards a UN-held stadium in the north of the city. Worse, there's not enough vehicles for all the troops.
At that point, the plan was to run out next to vehicles.
Randy Romalia and Kenny Thomas now have to run a gauntlet of enemy fire. And they try to use the vehicles as cover.
It was a pretty intense fight still that morning.
It sounded like someone had picked up a handful of pebbles and were throwing it against sheet metal. That tink, 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 which was bullets bouncing off vehicles.
But soon the men on foot are left behind.
We got to the first intersection, and that vehicle didn't stop for us. It kept going.
And I'm a pretty fast guy, but I'm not that fast. They put the pedal down, man, took off. And that left about 30 of us ran from that city.
With their cover gone, Kenny and Randy suddenly find themselves more exposed to enemy fire.
It felt like somebody had walked up and struck me.
Looked like someone hit him with a baseball bat on the shoulder, like he just kind of did this thing.
So once I realized I had been shot, I reached into my body armor to check for an exit wound. And I started breathing in and out deeply, expecting to hear a gurgling. Lungs were still intact, I could still move, I could still breathe, which was of relief. But I knew that I was okay enough to keep moving forward.
Eventually, Kenny and Randy managed to scramble on board UN vehicles. Half an hour later, the convoy finally forces its way back to the safety of the UN-held stadium. Task Force Rangers' 14-hour ordeal is over.
As our task force came back together, it was a very emotional sight.
You know, when you look at each other, you don't have to say anything, because you know you gave it everything you could.
That was the first time I felt safe. But the reality of what had just taken place was starting to set in.
And the emotion just comes out of you. And I remember I started tearing up. And Randy walked up to me and he was asking me if I was okay. Like, he was worried about me, and he was the guy with a hole in his back. But at that time, it was enough to know he was alive, because I knew by then, you know, we had lost guys. And I knew it was a big deal.
General Garrison now counts the cost of the mission. 18 Americans, 1 Malaysian peacekeeper, and 500 Somalis are dead. Worse still, the bodies of the crew from the second crash site are mutilated and dragged through the streets in front of video cameras. Garrison would later write to President Clinton, saying full responsibility rested with him and not in Washington. The situation gets worse. The Somalis broadcast images of the captured helicopter pilot, Michael Durant.
Michael Durant was held captive.
11 days after the raid, he is released. But the humiliation causes outrage in the US. In March 1994, US troops withdraw from Somalia. A year later, the UN also pulls out. In the years since the Black Hawk Down mission, the men who fought in Somalia remain proud of what they achieved. Adid's 2 sidekicks were both captured alive.
We were there to accomplish a mission, and we did accomplish the mission. Yeah, we got our nose bloodied in the fight, but we won the fight.
The men of Task Force Ranger did everything they could to bring their comrades home. Their fighting spirit will ensure this operation will go down in Special Forces history.
You know that you had every opportunity to step out of the fight, but nobody did, because they were fighting for each other, because they knew if they stepped out of it, it would leave someone hanging. And you weren't gonna do that to your Ranger buddies. You weren't gonna do it to anybody. And that feeling sticks with you for life.